Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Learning at Xaltem, our weekly webinar, which we do every Thursday at 8 p.m. Just to give you a reason why we do this, well, learning is our passion, and we would definitely like to share our learning insights with the learning community. And it's also an opportunity for us to learn from the community back. So it's a two-way street, as they call it. Now, the content which we plan to share during our weekly connects at 8 p.m. on every Thursday is insights and hacks related to training interventions, learning strategies, and design. And we would also love to pick up issues and queries which the community may have and would like to pick our brains to share our insights with them. Method, how do we want to do this, is we'll do in a form of masterclass like we are doing today. And we would also like to going ahead share use cases not only from us, but we'll also love to have other leader practitioners come and share their insights and use cases with the larger community. So at Exaltum, we enable transformation, and that includes us as well. So as much as we would love to contribute in small but meaningful ways in the transformation of the community we serve, but it's also about transforming ourselves as we go ahead. Okay. So in our last episode, we talked about a concept called transfer climate, which could significantly help a learning practitioner to sharpen their interventions as they're going and designing about it. And we also shared what learning transfer means, which is a larger concept under which training transfer climate is a sub concept of the larger concept of training transfer. So researchers have defined training transfers as the degree to which trainees apply to their jobs the knowledge, skills, and behaviors and attitudes they gained in training back at the workplace. Now, that's the million-dollar question, right? Which has been always there for all of us practitioners and business as well. But as we are in a time and in a context where every training dollar is getting reviewed hardly and with a sharper focus, and where business requires even more returns on every training dollar which is getting invested, the concept and the theme of training transfer, that how much of the learned skills, knowledge, uh, the trainees are applying back to their workplace is a very, very important question, which is gaining traction, which is getting becoming even more important as we go ahead. Okay, and we also shared as a concept, while training transfer is a sort of a super ordinate concept under which training transfer climate falls. So just a little bit about training transfer, where researchers have looked at under the input side the training characteristics, which could be the abilities which trainees bring to the table, which could be their personality profiles, or it could be the motivation they have even before coming into the training. Then, of course, training design plays a very, very important role. So, how the adult learning principles are being incorporated in the design itself, how each learning episodes are getting sequenced one after another, and the what of the training. So, how engaging it is, how exciting it is, how meaningful it is. And then there is the work environment, how the environment which talks about the support the learners will get and how much opportunity they're going to get once they go back to their workplace to apply the learned skills is the environment, and which is essentially linked to our today's concept of training transfer climate. Of course, the output side, it's the learning and retention, how much people are learning through these programs and how much of those learnings are getting retained as they speak. And then the conditions of transfer is also about generalization. So, at how wide context these learned skills could be applied, or is it very, very, very sharp focus that these would have applications only in some scenario versus a generalization which is at multiple scenarios this could be applied by the learners. And maintenance, how long are these learned skills supposed to get maintained by the learners? How long the learning designer expects the application of the learning to happen? And in that context, we then talked about training transfer climate, which is related to the work environment. That how does the environment support application of learning? And and we talked about seven constructs. Okay, so one is of course I won't say the top one, but in my experience, a very important one is the supervisor support. How much support the learner's manager is going to support them in application of the learning back to their job. Very important, right? Then the opportunity to use. So I have learned something in a program, but how much, what are my opportunities to go back to my workplace and apply those learning? Or is it that I'm learning something which does not have too much connection or opportunities for me to actually go back and apply? Peer support. As I do the application, how are my peers going to support me? And then supervisor sanctions. It's exactly the opposite of supervisor support. How much are the managers going to give sanctions, or are they going to act against learners going and applying the learned skills from the workplace? And you could relate to this. How often have you seen the manager of a learner who has spent some time in a training program goes back and the manager says, okay, you've already spent a lot of time in the program. Now it's time to do quote unquote work, real work. Now, what message is the learner getting? That training is all good, but work is something different. Okay, so that supervisor sanctions, they're actually working against application of learned skills. Then there are personal outcomes. Positive, which is if I apply the learning, are there certain positive outcomes which is going to happen as a result of me applying the learning? And then personal outcomes negative. If I apply the learning, are there going to be some adverse outcomes? I'm going to lose something. Something bad is going to happen if I apply the learning. Sounds strange, right? But happens many times. You could think of a scenario where I feel if I go and do this, then maybe I'm not going to deliver on my sales quota, and hence I'm going to lose out on incentives. Or the expectation from my organization is something, a different way of doing things. What is being trained in here? And if I try to do that, I'm going to really upset the system, and something not so good is going to happen to me. Okay. And then there is the seventh construct, which is the resistance. How much is the system, the ecosystem of the learner at the workplace going to work as a resistance or act against my ability as a learner to go back and apply the learning? Okay, so these are the seven constructs we talked about in our last webinar also. But today, what we are going to do is I'm going to share a use case from my own experience and then link it back to how these seven constructs have been considered and then linked to the learning design itself. Let's dive right in. So working in an organization in the healthcare sector, large workforce. In India, they had almost 1,000 strong field force. And the problem statement was in the employee engagement survey, the results were very strong. But on one dimension, the scores were a little lower. And the dimension was related to the manager of the employee. So they said the manager could be more supportive. Okay. Now, so hence to the learning and development team, the ask was, what could we do about it? This is what the employees are feeling, and that's what they're sharing. And interestingly, the scores were even lower at the higher levels of the hierarchy, which means the way the maybe the frontline person has rated their managers versus people at a higher level in the hierarchy has rated, so the scores are even lower, which means the issue actually becomes more intense or acute as you go higher up the hierarchy. Okay, so the mandate was, so what could we do from a learning and development perspective to sort of solve this problem? Okay, interesting, right? Now, while designing for the intervention, one thing was, it made the use case probably even more exciting. We were actually in the pandemic, so getting people in the classroom in person was not possible. So whatever we had to do through a virtual mode. Now, so the problem statement is, people feel their managers could be more supportive, they could be more responsible. Okay, so this is what, and people at higher levels of the organization felt this issue is at an even bigger level. So the scores, became lower and lower as you went up the hierarchy. Okay. Now, we talked about the seven constructs, right? So, supervisor support, opportunity to use, peer support, supervisor sanctions, personal outcomes positive, and personal outcomes negative, and then the resistance. So, let me share the story of this intervention and link to these seven constructs of the transfer climate. Okay. Now, the first one is supervisor support. How much support the manager of the learner in the classroom or in the intervention. Okay, so so how did we build that in the design element of this intervention? And remember, the issue was the scores were even lower at higher levels of the hierarchy. So as an organization, as leadership, we decided to focus on the sales team because they were going through tremendous uncertainty at that point of time, because in the healthcare, while the selling model has been pretty static over the decades, but the pandemic completely upended it and disrupted it, and very new ways and different ways of doing things and all that. And there, of course, the manager plays a very, very critical role in terms of helping people adopt to and adapt to new ways of doing things. So now the question is, if the managerial support is perceived at even lower levels at the higher levels of the hierarchy, what do you do in the design? What change or tweak do you put into the design of the intervention? So we decided to actually target the second line sales leader. We didn't start from the first line. Okay, we started from the second line. The second line sales leader. Now the question is, the second line sales leader, remember, they are manager of managers, who in turn then leads the front line. Now the question is, if we know that even the next level, which is the third line sales leader, is generally the scores have come even lower. Now, how do we ensure that that person who is the third line sales leader is going to support this guy who is the second line sales leader, who is going to sit in the classroom? Okay, so we brought in a very interesting piece of the design there. Said, okay, and this is a remember this is a 100% virtual session. Okay, so we actually launched this program from an orientation perspective to the highest level of the sales hierarchy, starting with the national sales heads. Okay, so we first told them, hey, you know what? This is what we are trying to do. What are your inputs? What are your feedbacks and all that? Okay. So in the process, what happened was the next line of supervisors were very clear what we were supposed to do, what are the reasons, these are the scores which has come, this is an opportunity to actually build managerial capabilities at all level, starting from more senior levels. Okay. Now, this ensured that the most senior sales leaders actually had a stake in not only the deployment, they also had a stake in the design of the intervention. And during the intervention deployment, we made a very interesting tweak in the design. So we actually created learning mentors out of the third line sales leaders who would be also training the second line sales leaders. Where would they be training? Remember, this is 100% virtual. Okay. So we actually created breakout rooms when the third line sales leaders had, each of them had one breakout room as their charge. So remember, they had been oriented before, they had been trained before. So while we had them in the main room, we had the discussion of the concepts. In the breakout rooms, it's actually the learning mentors who are the third line sales leaders who are actually ensuring the application through the role plays which are happening in the breakout rooms, and they are guiding and coaching the second line sales leaders. Now, understand this. So, two things are happening here. One is the design itself is ensuring that the supervisor knows what's happening. He or she has a stake in this because he or she is also involved in deployment of the learning. Okay. Now, relating back to the opposite construct, which is the supervisor sanctions, which is when these people, learners, go back to their workplace, are the supervisors going to stop them from applying the learning? So, just by ensuring this element in the design, that the program is pre launched to the highest level of the sales hierarchy, and the managers of the learners actually were present during the intervention when it's happening, and they are also training and coaching their folks in the rooms. Now, one, they know it. They are seeing how well or what are the challenges that people are facing in doing that. So their coaching on this new way of doing things is starting in the training itself. And once they're going back, the other thing which we also put in was an action learning plan, which the third line sales leader would coach the second line sales leader. Remember, the learner is the second line sales leader. Okay, of their direct reports, who are also managers of the first line. Now, they are supposed to deploy this, and this deployment and how well they are able to apply in the design itself, we put the third line sales leaders who were their mentors, learning mentors in the breakout rooms. They have to review the application of the action learning plan by the second line sales leader as a part of their regular sales review. And we also introduced, uh, you know, a very easy way of capturing whether or not this is happening. So it's a binary. Have you done this versus not done this? And this score was going to the highest level of the sales hierarchy and also the business leadership. Okay. So supervisor support and supervisor sanctions, these two constructs were actually looked at. And through this tweak in the design itself, by pre-launching the program to the manager and the manager of managers of the learners, and also ensuring that the manager of the learner, the third line sales leader, as a co facilitator in the breakout rooms, and then making them review the application of the learning plan by the second line sales leader. These two constructs of supervisor support and supervisor sanctions were actually linked very nicely. Interestingly, the repeat survey of the employee engagement survey saw a significant uptick on this element of managerial support. So, which is extremely interesting. Okay. So now we talked about the two constructs, which is supervisor support and supervisor sanctions. The next one is opportunity to use. Remember, we talked about the action learning plan. What was the action learning plan for the second line sales leader who were the learners? They had to do two things. One, they had to identify one area of coaching for their next line, which is the sales managers, and then they had to coach it for the next 3 months and submit an ongoing report on how the sales manager is progressing on their coaching theme which they had identified for them. First thing. The second thing was, after we launched this to the second line sales leaders, the same model was then run to the next level, which was the sales managers, the first line sales managers were also trained through the sales model. And guess what? This time, their managers, who are second line sales leaders, who are already trained in this, were actually the learning mentors in the breakout rooms. So, one, they first have gone through this training themselves, applied that, and then they were also the co facilitators along with the learning and development and HR teams, ensuring that the next line of leadership, which is the first line sales manager, is also trained on this. Okay. Peer support. How much peers of the learners are going to support each other in ensuring this happens. So, one interesting way we did this was also create accountability partners. So, the learners who were in the classrooms, a group was created, and people in groups of 2 or 3 were also paired to ensure sharing of success stories, which is happening in terms of application of learning plan. Okay. And of course, the other initiatives which were taken by many learning team members is create WhatsApp groups where you actually come back and share what learners have achieved in terms of application of learning, what's working versus what's not working, and all that. And needless to mention, to do this level of an intervention with so much of intensity and application rigor, one thing goes without saying: you must have the highest level of leadership as strongly committed to the intervention, and they must be sponsoring in the true sense of the term. So the application and execution of this learning intervention was getting reviewed by the highest level of leadership on a regular level. And that put in so much of intensity and seriousness to the intervention. Now, this is linked to the resistance, which is one of the transfer climate constructs. When you ensure leadership buy-in, when you ensure that the leaders are reviewing the application of the learning plans, that becomes a truly virtuous cycle for a learning intervention success in terms of application, in terms of the learning effectiveness which learners could get from the deployment of the intervention. Since the mandate had come from the highest level of leadership, and the way the design was done, and at every level of the hierarchy was involved in either knowledge and or involvement in the learning deployment, made a lot of excitement around this intervention. And I'm sure this is the reason which contributed significantly to the uptick of the engagement metric on this very important parameter of managerial support. Okay, so we now talked about a few constructs: so supervisor support, peer support, supervisor sanctions, and resistance. Uh, let's talk about opportunity to use. Now, remember, this is an intervention through which we were also trying to impact positively the coaching culture in the organization. Uh, the way people coach and the frequency of coaching. So the both the quantity and the quality of coaching we were trying to impact, starting from the higher levels of the organization. Now, this is not easy. We all talk about coaching culture and all that, but how many organizations you can name that where we say yes, coaching is integral part of the culture, that every level of leadership invest their time, energy, and effort in coaching their next level. And even in organizations where you would have seen this in the past, due to the tremendous uncertainties today we are going through, you see so many paradigms of so-called great organizations are getting broken as we speak, right? So this is not easy. So opportunity to use has to have systemic elements in that. It's not going to happen just like that. So the action learning plan was only the first step to that. More importantly, how do you ensure that the every level of leadership reviews the application of the learning plan was the most important thing. So the head of the business had this metric, that how well the action learning plans of people who are who have got trained. So how many people have got trained, and not only that, how many of them are actually able to go back and apply the learning. This had a huge impact on creating not only opportunity to use, but creating a condition for use, which is linked to the opportunity to use construct and also to the resistance piece. Finally, we'll talk about the last two constructs, which is personal outcomes, positive and negative. First, the positive outcomes. So, what were the positive outcomes? So, the learning mentors, people who volunteered, the senior sales leaders who volunteered for the learning mentor, so they were recognized for their contributions which they were making at the highest level of the leadership of the organization. So there was a tremendous excitement of people to know, okay, this makes sense for me. Let me invest some time, energy, and effort in actually training my next line. Okay. Then the application of the learning plan, I already shared that this was part of the regular review. When you make a learning application part of a regular review, you have also made it as a part of the performance management system. So when I am applying this, I'm able to do this. This also goes into my performance management, that yes, I am able to apply, I'm able to execute a very important ask from me as a leader of my people. Now, that's in the immediate sense that, okay, I get recognized by the organization and also my performance goes northwards. But a more sustained impact, of course, was started impacting the way people coach. So if you get leaders, sales leaders, to actually spend time, invest time in trying to coach their next line, and remember, we were trying to impact a lot of layers of the sales hierarchy, starting from the top. So, of course, that would have great impact on the next line. So when finally, by the time the sales managers, the first line sales managers got trained and they started applying, so the as they say, the impact of the goodness is reaching the bottom of the pyramid. Of course, it's a long, long way to go before an organization can say that yes, we're a learning organization where coaching is a part of the our fabric, and every leader at every level invest time in it. Long way to go, but it's a great start. Personal outcomes negative. if I go and apply the learning from this workshop, are there going to be some adverse impacts on me and all that? Of course, we made sure that those chances of those things happening, that somebody saying, hey, you know what, you can do all this coaching later. What about getting some hardcore sales numbers and all that? So, since we were doing sort of a whole system intervention involving every level of leadership, so through the process, we have also negated the chance of a potential negative personal outcome to a learner if they actually go and apply the learning. Okay. So, an extremely interesting story, a very, very close to heart learning design for me. And most importantly, this is one design which was put at a very large scale. And here was an intervention which was designed well. The application was even more interesting. I was talking about the breakout rooms, right? So each breakout room had multiple people who were actually the role players, because the learners had to coach their next line. So we had got people from the learning and development team, from the human resources team, along with the learning mentors who were there, creating an environment wherein you're just not learning, you are immediately getting a chance to go back and apply. Remember, opportunity to use. So adult learning principle says, what's how much opportunity I'm going to get to apply what I know. And part of this design was getting people to go and immediately apply the learning in the breakout rooms. But it required a huge amount of support from many people. And I think this intervention was a fantastic example of collaboration between human resource, the learning teams, and the sales leadership together, which really created a wonderful learning environment where people could learn, people could apply, and then there is an ecosystem support for them to go back. When they go back, they are they're getting, somebody is there to hold them accountable. That, are you doing this? So I think it was a fantastic example of a learning intervention which really created impact. So we talked about the training transfer climate. We talked about the seven constructs: supervisor support, opportunity to use, peer support, supervisor sanctions, personal outcomes positive and personal outcomes negative from application of the learning, and finally the resistance. And I have also had the pleasure of sharing a very close to the heart example of a learning intervention where we had looked at these transfer climate constructs and then tweaked the design and created a design which involved every level of the leadership and ensured that the learners had enough opportunity to go back and practice, apply, and they are also getting coached and reviewed by their next line of leadership to ensure that this becomes a way of life. So, thank you so much for being with us in this weekly webinar, Learning at Xaltem. We bring this webinars to you every Thursday, sharp at 8 p.m. Thank you so much for being here, and please do send your comments in the chat section when you watch this video. We'll be very happy to get your feedback. Very happy to hear your insights and perspectives on this subject. Hear your examples and use cases, and we will soon come back with another episode of Learning at Xaltem, Thursday, 8 p.m. Thank you very much. Take care.